Hi, I'm McNulty. I'm here today to talk to you about future applications of 3D data for historical clothing. I started off as a designer here in London, England. I had a little dress shop in Chelsea Green, and I was making my own clothing. I even made my own wedding dress. I just didn't really know what I was doing. I was always trying to catch up with what I'd never been taught in school, the math of pattern design. Obviously the shop didn't last a long time, and I found a journalist who introduced me to the whole world of 3D clothing. That was over 40 years ago. And she needed someone to do illustration on a color graphics computer. And for me, this is mixing the best of two worlds. Being able to work with computers and clothing, I knew the math would work, that was how it could be done. And it was already being done. I still am so much into design and clothing. That's an artistic version of my workroom, complimentaries of a friend. And that's myself in the wedding dress last year at the Dare to Wear Red fashion show. That was part of the Society of the Museum of Original Costume. I was president of the society and fell in love with all the clothing. But at the same time, this was our museum. Everything was stuck in an attic versus any type of visual display. And I started thinking about a virtual museum, of combining the two, of historical clothing in a way that you could see it. I came across Clo 3D, and I started learning the software and started creating 3D in historical. This was an inspiration, but it's basically doing a Worth dress, creating it from what was a similar design in a painting, and then doing my version. And then at the same time, that becomes that is a 3D version, the way it's done with the Clo software. Part of my love of clothing was involved with putting together a website and all the photography for Klaus Yankee. He does a pre-war, Jewish-made German and Austrian clothing collection. It's absolutely beautiful. And we did all the shoes and the dresses, well, not all of his collection, but a lot of some absolutely beautiful pieces. And I had to start creating those in 3D. I just wanted to experiment with that gorgeous goat's coat. And what with the new simulations of sequin and fur, I was able to get a reasonable facsimile, a reasonable copy, as you can see. So the two on the left are Clo, and the one on the right is the real thing, or the real 2D. So what I want to do is today talk to you about a couple of trends that are happening in apparel and where I see it going with museums. So trend one is flexible 3D assets, and I see it all tying together from the clothing manufacturer world to museum displays and the apparel industry and future technology. So at a recent conference, Production and Innovation Apparel Conference in New York City, we got to hear Daniel Fritz talk about the whole 3D application for IKEA, and it was a fascinating talk. He talked initially about how with the product development that 55% of IKEA's assets are created in CAD firstly. Then another 45% are scanned with museum quality scanners. A lot of that actually involves the couches. Apparently you can't get a really natural looking couch unless you scan the real thing. But either way, it then becomes a whole 3D communicative model, as he calls it, where you've got metadata, you've got position, you've got relative sizing, you've got a logic, combination logic, whatever that means. But the most important thing is where it goes next, and it's going to all the other possibilities of augmented reality, virtual, print, web, interior design, store design. Again, it could be museum design. It's creating an asset that you can use in multiple ways and a consistent asset. So on that basis, I'm asking you now to take a look at this photograph. Yes, there's a bit of lens flare from where I took it at the lecture, but at the same time, there is the one on the right and the one on the left. Which one do you think is real? I'll give you a minute to think, or a few seconds. Right. So it's the one on the left. But at the same time, what it's really showing you is how flexible the assets can be if it can look the same as a photo studio shoot. And that photo studio shoot would have taken time and space to make happen. So I want to talk about the trends in CAD, in the apparel industry. There are a lot of people working towards creating 3D design blocks, product development, fitting, catalogs, and of course 3D retail. And how that all works is with the apparel industry, or I see it all working in the future, is with the apparel industry. Virtual sample rooms, production line sampling, which gives you efficiency, consistency, sustainability, and speed to market. Those things are important to our industry. And then there's education. I actually teach Glow 3D, mainly because I'm madly in love with the software. I think it's the future, but either way, you have to create that 3D for online retail. It gives you a consistent image, or you don't have to, but it's a brilliant way to give a consistent image in your online catalogs. It's a form of fashion illustration. It's, of course, you're also creating 3D data and patterns. It's bridging the gap, I feel, with the 3D creation between the pattern skills that you hopefully have learned, and at the same time, the future skills that everybody's going to need. It's an employee base for the future, and it's a proactive solution. And of course, part of all of this is, again, what I have really learned with costume history. Recreating clothing, historical clothing, teaches you how the pieces come together in a way that a lot of other things wouldn't. It gives you the ability to start creating digital archives, virtual displays, and it's a blended skills. And of course, all of this lends itself to innovation or innovative technologies, future technologies of the mixed realities, or what do they call it, the extended reality. So, but either way, virtual, which is where you're immersed, mixed is where you're half and half, and augmented is where you can place something right in this environment. I have samples I can show you if you'd like after the lecture. So how 3D data works with the clothing industry and how it did when I first entered it was a lot of math. I mean, we're talking about gigantic machines that do your cutting and laying of the fabric and grading of the sizes and the math of large production clothing. But with the new softwares, the entry level is much different, where this is the 3D look is an iPhone app where you can scan your body. You can then get an OBJ file, you can import it, and you can dress it. These are all patterns that can then be printed and made up into clothing. So it's a fantastic software. It gives you the ability to create patterns. You can even draft your initial sizes within the software. And then at the same time, you can start choosing fabrics and textures and colors, and that gives you a lot of flexibility. But I think what really says it best is this video, which is again part of the software. This gives you the ability to see texture, movement, color, and it's just a matter of, instead of doing an export, you do an animation. It also gives you the ability to do your own clothing. Gorgeous, gorgeous piece. And you're seeing how the fabric moves, and you'd be able to see how different fabric moves. colors and different colors moved. And here again, we've got zips, stitching, buttons. These become 3D assets you create for your clothing. But again, lovely linen. And here's even some leather and waterproof simulation. And that's the thing too, is with this software, the next trend I want to explain is the digital sampling, is where, again, you can bring it to market in a different way. One or two, or rather you're doing several samples and then making a decision about what you're going to make physically, versus the old-fashioned way is to create the concept, then take it back to the pattern maker and sew it up again, and then take it back to the pattern maker, sew it up again. I mean, when you're talking about a small detail of changing the neckline or the hem length, or perhaps with this one here, the plaid, that one's just not that as interesting or dynamic as the diagonals. One might want to change this skirt to a black. I mean, there's lots of possibilities when you can really think it out in 3D and in digital firstly. And then, of course, you can start recreating historically. This is from a 1930s magazine where I was able to trace out that pattern piece and then create these and have it fitting on a, let's call it a size 12 model, and add transparency and lace to some of the fabrics. Piping, stitch detail. It's fantastic software for, again, really starting to get a good idea of what it can look like. This, again, is the Pro pajamas, which I've only just recently come across this photograph, and had I known, I would have made sure that I had the applique on the bottom of the PJs and maybe a slightly wider leg. But either way, one thing you can see with my rendition is what's possibly on the back. And I mean, I'm only guessing. But the simulation between the two is totally reasonable. There's light. There can be even more light and texture if you want. Again, this has all the data of the pattern piece sizes and the appliques and the fabrics versus just a visual. And I ask you now, of course, my usual obsession with recreating historical fashion, but which one is the right one? I mean, I'm sorry, which one is the photograph? Which one is the clothes? Any guesses? Left or right? Okay. So, it was the one on the right. I'll show you again. This one is the clothes, and that one is a 2D photograph, and it's actually very small. But anyways, I was able to, I'm not totally happy with this, but I still was able to do a reasonable texturing of the recreation of the fabric and adding some glitter to it and recreating a few of the sequins. I do have to stop myself, or else I'd spend hours and hours on it. But it was a pleasure, and it's still not finished. This is also is also another person I've come across equally interested. Her whole thesis, her whole master's thesis, was about recreating in Clothes 3D in comparison. And she has pages and pages that talk about recreating from muslin to the actual fabric, Balenciaga's one seam coat. And her conclusions are the virtual garment software can produce accurate garments. You do have to know about pattern drafting and the software. And the more experienced the user, the more efficient and accurate the results. And best results mean using the best computer, a different subject, but definitely true. So I want to talk about other trends, because everybody will also say what's happening next. We also had a talk by Kevin James Wilson talking about his digital model agency. He created couple years ago, this one model, and it became an internet sensation, and then people started hiring her. Shadu, Women's Wear Daily had her on the cover, and Marie Claire, and there was a lot of talk, let alone other models were created because of this. So this is interesting because it gives us the possibility of, as far as I'm concerned, creating mannequins for historical fashion. and of course simulations. There's also other possibilities. Right here is a model and an avatar that were recreated. This is possibly going to change the world's workflow in some ways. You could be two places in one at the same time. But anyways, again, I ask you, is it the left or the right that is the real model? And I'll tell you it's the right. So again, we can also talk about sustainability. I feel it's a separate conversation, but there is a 3D retail coalition that is working hard on getting standards for the 3D industry. And these are some of the people involved, and then of course the idea is that we are changing the whole fashion chain. Fashion needs to disrupt, to clean up. One of the other trends I want to clarify is scanning versus 3D, especially since I was talking about how IKEA did scanning of their couches. I do think it should be included because firstly, this is how you're getting your fabric. You go out, you buy your fabric, and then you have it scanned. And there's special $30,000 scanners that measure the mathematical X, Y, drape, texture of how your fabric works. And you can actually go and even buy similar fabrics to what you have online in terms of drape on your 3D. And then I also want to point out a scanner that exists for that can be attached to your iPad. Again, I can show anybody who wants to see it what it's like, but it gives you the ability to self-scan. So a quick video. One of the advantages of this software is it has the ability to go straight to a website. Again, this will exist and will only get better, or this does exist and will only get better. Museums will go digital, and there's some attempts on, some beginning attempts on. Firstly, I want to discuss the physical museums. Less than 3% of the collection is visible at the National Gallery of Scotland. 97% is unseen. Heavily booked for access. Again, if we think of how many exhibitions can exist, we're just not going to see much of these collections. There's 35,000 items at the Met, and you can go online and see some 2D pictures. And then there's 53,000 plus at the V&A, and again, online pictures. I think we have to start looking into the idea of 3D apparel museums sooner than later. This clothing is disintegrating and people don't have access. Virtual museums, what do they look like? I think it's early days, but at the same time, certain things are definitely happening there. This is a rendition of the clo, showing off the Richard Town dress. I'd like to go at those feathers again, but it gives you an idea of vague, of some realism that could be part of it all. This, We Wear Culture by Google have done an absolutely brilliant job. If you ever want to get lost, there's some amazing exhibits within, and some of them are 2D and some of them are 360. It's best to just go take a look, but I'll show you now just a brief overview. Anyway, some absolutely brilliant stuff on site. It's just a gorgeous site, but there's just a few articles that are actually virtual. Christie's Auction House last year did a virtual tour of Catherine Deneuve's Yves Saint Laurent collection, which is interesting, an auction house showing off clothing. And it becomes a navigatable 3D space, because you do actually have to create a 3D space to navigate in a 3D way. And you can go up to each one of the dresses and get an idea of what the price possibly was, what it looked like, some of the detail. It's an interesting experience. Again, they've created a virtual store. Maybe in another year or two, these will be much more 3D versus 2D. But at the same time, it's a beautiful exhibit in terms of Yves Saint Laurent clothes. This one is quite special. I haven't been able to find out a lot about this museum other than it's gorgeous. What's interesting is they have the whole 2D picture actually sort of turn and face you. So it's an imitation 3D, but I think still a gorgeous, gorgeous job. And then it has many, many rooms and many, many photographs that you can navigate through. But I just want to wait to take a look at one particular dress to again show you what happens when you have the possibility of a lot of data, within a virtual museum. I'm talking about this gold dress coming up. Any ideas on who it belongs to? So here's a 3D version, and this was Jacqueline Kennedy's Onassis wedding dress. I mean, it really becomes special when it starts to have so much more of a story. So now what I'd like you to do is think about the future. Close your eyes and imagine a 3D historical fashion, generational archive that will last forever. Imagine your family's wedding dress or special tuxedo that you've always wanted your children to have that will never fit them. What if that could be digitally archived in a way that it could fit the grandchildren? And think of all those special pieces that people aren't seeing because they're hidden away in basements of museums, being saved for the future, and at the same time were saved for that exhibition. I don't think 2D photographs are the answer. I think 3D data